There is an activity so prevalent, so ongoing, and so silent that most people fail to realize how much it drains the vital energy they carry within. It requires no physical exertion, makes no sound, and is invisible to the eye. Yet, it consumes a significant portion of our life force. Overthinking has become a norm, even celebrated. However, when left unchecked, thinking becomes a continuous stream that fragments attention, accelerates the body's internal systems, and begins to distort our perception of reality. The consequences of this internal noise are often unrecognized because it doesn't present itself as an overt symptom, but as a subtle energetic disruption. The energy field doesn't respond merely to external actions, but more profoundly to the quality of the information circulating within. When thought runs rampant without awareness, when it becomes an endless hum of noise, it creates a vibrational overload, distorting the very fabric of the energy field. This interference may not be immediately noticeable, but over time, it manifests as mental fatigue, difficulty remaining in the present moment, and a sense of disconnection between what we seek and what we experience. Across many spiritual teachings, the mind is seen as a tool, useful, necessary, but dangerous when it takes the reins. When thought is not recognized as temporary and passing, it solidifies into identity. This is when it ceases to be neutral. The more one identifies with their thoughts, the harder it becomes to recognize that there is something far greater beyond them. Excessive thinking doesn't just create confusion. It fragments the energetic field, alters its vibration, and makes it more challenging to access clarity, deeper perception, and spiritual magnetism. And the more one tries to resolve this with more thought, the more the field becomes clouded. The mind insists on occupying all the space. But true transformation resides in space. Not external time or space, but the inner space that allows for a higher consciousness to emerge. Without this inner space, there is no pause between one thought and the next. No recognition that not every mental impulse needs to be followed. Understanding how overthinking impacts our energy field is essential on the journey of self-awareness. For rearranging our vibrational state doesn't come from controlling the world or even controlling our mind. It comes from realizing how often the mind runs on autopilot. And when this excess mental chatter is brought into awareness, a profound shift begins to unfold. Thought is one of the mind's most basic functions. Yet, most people have never asked themselves, what exactly is thought? Through thought, decisions are made, experiences are interpreted, and realities are shaped. On the surface, it may appear as just a sequence of images, words, memories, and projections. However, upon deeper reflection, it becomes clear that thinking doesn't always happen by choice. It occurs by pattern. Thoughts aren't always created anew. They are merely repeated. They stem from old records, memories, past interpretations. And what's most surprising is that this repetition is relentless. The mind has been conditioned to function like a constant surveillance system. It analyzes, compares, judges, and predicts, even when no real danger exists. The activity persists from habit, conditioning, or impulse. This automatic thought process creates an internal environment where thought is no longer a tool. It's an uninterrupted flow of noise. The more continuous this noise becomes, the more it is mistaken for reality itself. It often becomes impossible to distinguish thought from actual perception. What we experience is not reality as it is, but mental interpretation, a distorted image shaped by past experiences, fears, or expectations. And this is where energetic interference begins. This noise, far from being harmless, generates a constant vibration that affects the surrounding energy field. Every mental activity carries a frequency, and that frequency influences how energy flows through the body, through the field, and in our interactions with the world. Rapid thoughts create unstable fields. Repetitive thoughts generate dense fields. Negative thoughts fragment the very structure of our energy field. The more intense the mental activity, the less space there is for intuition, perception, and higher states of presence. Even seemingly neutral thoughts, like daily tasks or simple reflections, when repeated excessively, generate an overload of vibrational information that prevents the energy field from remaining harmonious. It's important to recognize that this isn't about eliminating thought or judging it. It's about understanding the role it plays. Because when thought is no longer consciously directed, it begins to control the person. And in such a state, the mind no longer observes, it simply reacts. It anticipates, responds, pulls from old data, and projects it onto the present. This pattern is so old, so familiar, that it's rarely questioned. But just because something is familiar doesn't make it natural, and just because it feels inevitable doesn't mean it must continue. Mental repetition doesn't reflect the present, it reflects the past. This is why overthinking doesn't just delay personal growth, it disconnects you from the present moment. When the mind is too busy interpreting what's happening, it can't truly experience what's happening. The vibrational field, as a result, doesn't align with the now. Instead, it resonates with fragmented memories of what has already occurred. This creates an unstable, reactive, and blocked field, making it impossible to access inner clarity. True clarity arises when the inner space is freed from the noise of constant thought. Only then can the field align with the present moment and true transformation take place. This is why the first step to restoring balance isn't to think differently. It's to recognize just how much you're thinking without even realizing it. Once this becomes visible, the process of reorganization begins. The energy field precedes words, thoughts, and actions. It is dynamic and directly influences how we feel, how we perceive our surroundings, and how events unfold in our lives. In many spiritual teachings, this field is seen as an energetic extension of consciousness itself. Though it cannot be measured by conventional instruments, it can be perceived by those who cultivate sensitivity. The energy field carries information, not just from the physical body, but also from the mind, the emotions, and most profoundly from the quality of our inner states that repeat over time. Every individual emits a frequency. This frequency is not fixed. It shifts, adapts, intensifies, or diminishes depending on what is happening within. And this is where thought plays a crucial role. The energy field doesn't respond solely to external events. It primarily responds to what is sustained within the mind, the thoughts we repeatedly entertain, the mental patterns that persist, and the emotional states that are not released. Recurring thoughts act like tiny transmitters. The more the same mental content is repeated, the more it solidifies as an energetic pattern, and the more that pattern becomes entrenched, the more it shapes the experiences that unfold in our lives. This is why certain situations repeat, why familiar sensations emerge even after we change environments or routines. The field isn't driven solely by our actions, but by what we nourish internally with the greatest consistency. Thoughts, especially the unconscious reactive ones, carry more vibrational weight than we often realize. Constant thinking acts as a subtle blockage, interfering with the flow of energy, creating noise in our more sensitive perceptions, and eventually attracting experiences that resonate with the vibration we are emitting. A field overloaded with compulsive thinking becomes dense, fragmented, and unstable. This instability isn't always visible, but it can be felt, often as irritation with no apparent cause, a lack of focus, or a disconnect between what we desire and what we experience. In more harmonious states, the energy field flows effortlessly. There's a sense of lightness, clarity, and coherence between intention and reality. However, when there's an excess of thought, this natural flow is replaced with resistance, as if something invisible is blocking the experience. The quality of the energy we emit has a direct impact on the situations, people, and paths we encounter. And this quality is deeply connected to how we handle our thoughts. Fast, scattered, or tense thoughts generate interference, not only within, but externally as well. The energy becomes reactive, the field loses its coherence, and with it, the ability to attract experiences that align with the true self. What vibrates, manifests. And if the vibration is driven by the mind, then the way we think becomes one of the most powerful forces in the process of manifesting our own reality. One of the primary causes of overthinking doesn't lie in the content of the mind itself, but in our identification with it. The issue isn't the presence of thoughts. It's believing that those thoughts define who we are. This belief is the root of internal overload. Because the mind doesn't just think, it becomes the very thoughts it generates. Most people fail to realize that there's a distinct difference between what we think and who we truly are. When a thought arises, it's immediately assumed to be true, necessary, and part of a fixed identity. From there, a cycle begins. The thought triggers an emotion, and the emotion reinforces the thought. The energy field responds to this pattern as though it were the ultimate truth. But thought is not identity. It is merely passing content, fleeting, repetitive, and ever-changing. The consciousness that observes these thoughts, on the other hand, is stable. It is this ability to observe that breaks the cycle of identification. Without this space of awareness, the mind dominates the experience. If a thought of insecurity arises, it's not simply observed. It's lived as though it's the truth. If doubt emerges, it's not questioned. It's felt as a warning. This becomes the dominant vibration. After all, vibration responds to the content of the mind, not to objective reality. This identification is subtle but powerful. It builds a layer where everything passing through the mind is absorbed as part of the self. As a result, the energy field begins to vibrate reactively, not based on the present moment, but based on the mental narrative that's being replayed. How many of your thoughts truly arise from the present moment? And how many are just echoes of what you've already lived or fears of what might come? The energy field doesn't distinguish between what's present and what's remembered. It responds to what's active in the mind. And if what's active are automatic, conditioned, and unconscious thoughts, then that becomes the dominant vibration, even if the external environment doesn't justify it. This is why presence is so critical in breaking the cycle. It's essential to recognize that thoughts exist, but so does the one who observes them. The observer doesn't need to react. They simply perceive. And it is this perception that begins to dissolve the rigid structure of thought as identity. When consciousness adopts the position of the observer, the mind loses its power. Thoughts don't disappear. They become lighter, less urgent, and less true. The illusion of a fixed identity dissipates, and in its place, there emerges a space of pure presence. When thoughts are neither observed nor understood, they remain active not only in the conscious mind, but in the energy field. Thought does not cease when it arises. It leaves a lasting imprint. When repeated, that imprint forms a pattern. Over time, this pattern begins to operate automatically, influencing the vibrational state even when the content is no longer consciously present. This is how mental accumulation takes shape. Recurring thoughts, fueled by unconscious interpretations and past experiences, become fixed as subtle vibrational structures. These structures remain active until they are consciously acknowledged. Often, what feels like emotional weight, resistance, or inner instability is the direct result of old thoughts still active in the energy field. Many of these thoughts were never intentionally created. They're inherited, absorbed, or copied mental forms from family dynamics, social conditioning, childhood experiences, or the surrounding collective consciousness. This means that not every thought you carry is consciously chosen. However, if these thoughts continue to repeat within you, they shape your energy field. And as they shape the field, they also shape the way you experience reality. As we've discussed earlier, a field overloaded with accumulated thoughts tends to vibrate in a fragmented, dense, and repetitive manner. This fragmentation attracts situations that mirror the density of the field. That's why it's common to feel stuck in repetitive cycles, even after attempting to change behaviors or environments. The mind, in its attempt to solve these patterns, generates more thought, seeking explanations, justifications, and strategies. But mental accumulation cannot be dissolved through cognitive effort alone. It dissolves through awareness. When a thought is observed clearly, without judgment, it loses its power. And as its power diminishes, it begins to release its hold on the field. The key is not getting involved in every thought, because the more the narrative is fed, the more it solidifies energetically. What resides in the field loses strength when it is no longer fed. The first step is to notice what is being sustained and recognize how much of it is perpetuated out of habit, repetition, or simply because it was never questioned. To reorganize the field, one must first recognize what is occupying space. And the only way to recognize it is to observe it, because only what we are willing to see becomes visible. One of the greatest misconceptions on the path of inner reorganization is the belief that the goal is to stop thinking altogether. This misconception in itself creates tension. The more one tries to stop thinking, the more they become ensnared in the effort to control the mind. Control in this case does not lead to freedom. It leads to conflict. Thought does not need to be forcibly stopped. It simply needs to stop being the center of experience. When we talk about silencing the mind, we aren't suggesting that the mind disappear entirely. What we seek is not the total absence of thought, but the creation of a space where thoughts can arise without taking over. It's an internal shift, a transition from being entangled in the content of the mind to observing that content without becoming lost in it. The aim is not to stop the flow of thought, but to transform our relationship with it. When this relationship changes, the inner experience transforms. Thoughts still exist, but they no longer occupy the entirety of our consciousness. They no longer define the moment. They simply pass through like any other phenomenon. Inner silence emerges when there is a radical shift in how we experience thought. What quiets the mind is not the attempt to suppress mental content, but the ability to recognize thought as a transient phenomenon. Once this recognition stabilizes, thoughts no longer create inner friction, and the energy field ceases to respond as if each thought were a threat or an urgent call to action. In this state, the emotional involvement with thoughts begins to dissolve. The mind continues to function, but it no longer demands constant attention. The noise loses its urgency, and the impulse to react weakens. In this space of non-involvement, the ability to simply perceive arises. Perceiving without reacting is what energetically sets you free. This kind of silence emerges naturally when there is enough awareness to interrupt the cycle of identification. The noise in the mind is sustained by the habit of following every thought as if it holds absolute significance. What dissolves the noise is clear, direct, and unresisting observation. This inner release is not merely psychological. It is a shift in frequency. The energy field responds immediately when the system stops operating in reactive mode. Energy begins to flow again. Areas of tension gradually release. The nervous system slows down, and consciousness, free from excess mental noise, occupies the space once dominated by the mind. It is in this space, free from conflict, excess, and resistance, that the state known as flow emerges. Flow is what happens when there is no friction between who you are, what you are doing, and the present moment. It's when internal movement and external action fall into harmony, effortlessly, without constant analysis, mental interruptions, or resistance. This space of flow is the natural state of being where true alignment with the moment occurs, and where the mind, no longer the center of focus, becomes a tool that serves the higher purpose rather than dominating the experience. Flow is the natural fusion of action and perception, where everything moves with lightness and direction. Contrary to common belief, the state of flow doesn't depend on a specific activity. It's not limited to art, sports, or creativity. It can emerge in any situation where the mind ceases to interfere and consciousness steps forward. What these experiences share is the release of mental control. Flow is not born from control, but from the conscious surrender to the present moment without the fragmentation created by excessive thinking. Energetically, flow is highly coherent, causing the vibrational field to naturally reorganize without effort. Energy moves more freely, and with it comes vitality, clarity, and an expanded perception of reality. What once felt heavy or stagnant begins to flow. Intuition becomes more accessible. Synchronicity increases, and the experience of being lightens, not because thoughts have vanished, but because they no longer monopolize the inner space. In flow, the mind continues to function, but not as noise. It becomes a support system. Thoughts arise, but they don't interrupt. Decisions are made effortlessly. The body responds intelligently. Time seems to slow down, and you feel as if you are exactly where you need to be, without the need for justification or questioning. This alignment happens when the energy field is clear enough to allow energy to follow its natural course. But to reach this state, excessive thinking must be placed in its rightful context. This is the moment when the field stops reacting to mental patterns and begins responding to consciousness. In this more coherent state, higher levels of perception and clarity become accessible. To sustain this elevated frequency consistently requires more than occasional moments of presence. It requires a commitment to your own frequency. What sustains this new vibration isn't the environment or the results of future achievements, but the way each moment is experienced. The foundation for this shift is always the same, the way you respond to your mental movement. To observe thoughts is not to engage with them or to rationalize their existence. Observation is a direct, neutral, and present act. It's about seeing thoughts arise without following them, resisting them, or identifying with them. This type of observation creates a real internal space, a subtle sense of relief, as if something within is gently expanding. When consciousness is not absorbed in thoughts, it stabilizes the vibrational field. The once reactive field enters coherence, not through force, but through the absence of internal conflict. Creating this space requires intention and consistency. It is a daily practice, silent, often imperceptible to others, yet profoundly powerful in its internal effects. Each moment of conscious observation diminishes the power of automatic mental patterns. As this practice becomes habitual, the nervous system relaxes, the body eases, perception expands, and the field begins to reflect a new frequency. To achieve this, you don't need to abandon daily life or adopt complex rituals. The essence isn't in the practice itself, but in the quality of attention. Whether meditating for a few minutes, walking with total presence, or breathing consciously while observing thoughts, these are all ways to cultivate inner stillness. But perhaps the most powerful technique is the simple act of pausing, observing, and choosing. There is always a choice. The choice to remain absorbed in the mental flow, or to shift your perspective and become the observer. The choice to feed a thought, or to let it pass. The choice to react as usual, or to notice the impulse before it turns into action. These small, conscious choices, repeated over time, alter the base frequency of your experience. They don't just change your feelings, they shift what you emit. As your energy field adapts to this new information, what was once automatic becomes optional. What was unquestioned becomes seen with clarity. And as your perception clears, the vibrational field becomes lighter. presence ceases to be an effort and becomes a natural state. It is precisely in this spacious and coherent state that a new frequency emerges, different from the one maintained by old mental patterns. This coherence is not just an energetic concept. It manifests as a tangible quality in how life flows. Situations align more effortlessly. Communication becomes clearer. Decisions require less mental effort. There's a sense of order, and the internal frequency no longer experiences internal conflict. This new state does not arise from eliminating thoughts, but from dissolving the struggle against them. When the struggle ends, the energy that was once consumed in resistance or control is liberated, and this release alone is enough to alter your vibration. As this energy is released, the body feels lighter. Breathing becomes more natural. Intuition sharpens. The field begins to operate as it should, receptive, stable, and connected. At this stage, spontaneous insights often emerge, not as answers to questions you've been seeking, but as natural perceptions that arise from the silence within. This is because the space created by your observation allows deeper layers of consciousness to express themselves. These layers, previously hidden beneath the noise of the mind, now find an open field ready to reveal them. This new frequency is effortless. It does not require force. It flows naturally because it is rooted in the absence of internal conflict and the presence of awareness. This new frequency emerges as a reflection of the quality of presence that arises when the mind no longer dictates the rhythm of experience. The need for control dissolves into trust. The anxiety about the future fades away in the clarity of the present moment. And with this internal stability, the external world tends to respond differently, not because the world itself has changed, but because the vibration you bring to it has shifted. The key to understand is that this new frequency doesn't depend on maintaining a specific emotional state. You don't have to feel positive all the time. What sustains vibrational coherence is clarity, the ability to observe your inner movements without getting lost in them. When clarity is present, even challenging emotions no longer disrupt the field. They are recognized, processed, and released. This continuous flow prevents energy from crystallizing into reactive patterns. When the field is free from the struggle of the mind, it becomes a purer reflection of consciousness. It no longer echoes old patterns, but expresses something more aligned with the intelligence of the present moment. Once this vibration stabilizes, the experience of reality doesn't shift through mystical forces, but as a direct consequence of deep internal reorganization. From this more stable vibrational foundation, you can begin to live with greater clarity, flow, and integrity. However, this stability doesn't maintain itself automatically. It requires care, attention, and a particular form of responsibility. The responsibility to keep the field clear, observant, and open to the aliveness of the present moment. Living in this alignment doesn't mean having total control over your thoughts or emotions. It simply means knowing where to remain. Remaining in the consciousness that observes is what maintains the organization of energy. Thoughts will arise, emotions will move, impulses will surface. But the consciousness that perceives all of this does not need to be carried away. It is the stable point, the ground from which life can unfold without distortion. In the end, true transformation lies not in changing the mind, but in no longer giving it a power it was never meant to have. When this silent place becomes recognized as the most stable aspect of your experience, everything around you begins to reorganize. Not by chance, but because there is finally enough space for it to unfold. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this message resonated with you, I invite you to like, subscribe, and share this video so others can benefit from it as well. Feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts, reflections, and experiences. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to connecting again soon. Take care.